Here we have the interactive notebook page that goes with lessons 2.4 and 2.5 on square roots and cube roots. So again, the supplies that you need are your white paper and your green paper that says square roots and cube roots on it. You will also need scissors and a glue stick in order to complete your assembly. When you cut out these pieces, there are actually only 2 cuts to make. So you're going to cut out the title, square roots and cube roots, and then you're just going to cut around the outside of that large black box. Notice that there are 2 dashed lines there. Those are the 2 lines where you're going to be folding that box into thirds. So it's going to kind of look like a booklet or a pamphlet that's folded along those lines. All right, so go ahead and fold the bottom flap up so it's across the middle, and then take the top part or the top third and fold that down across there. So the middle section where you see the squares and the cubes is the only section that's going to get glue to be glued down on your paper. So the assembly here looks like this. You're going to put the title at the top of the page and then take that booklet or that little pamphlet, gluing the middle section only down onto your paper so that the top flap and the bottom flap will move freely and be able to fold down. Okay, you're going to want to leave room both above that piece that's glued and below that center part that is glued so that those 2 flaps move freely and you've got room to write. All right, so here's what your finished product looks like with it folded together. And then I'm going to be taking you through part of this, and then part of it we may be doing together in class. All right, first of all, we're going to write the word square roots on top of that top flap so that when we lift it up, we'll see the square roots that we have and the work that goes with them. However, above that top flap, we're going to make a small table, and that small table is also going to be titled square roots. So here's what you're going to do. I want you to make a table that has 2 rows and 11 columns. So I'm going to do mine and get mine set up, and then I'll come back and you'll see the finished product. Okay, so here's the finished product for that table that I want you to create above the flap that says square roots. So pause the video while you finish your table. On the bottom flap, as it's folded up on the blank side, I want you to label that cube roots. And then again, below that flap, underneath of it, I should say, you're going to make another table. And this table is going to look very similar to the one that we just made about square roots. So I'm going to pause the video while I'm making mine, and I want you to do the same thing on your paper. So we have integer as the first row, and this time we're going to be doing cube roots on the bottom row. And here is that finished table for you to make sure that you get that copied onto your paper. And then when you're done with that, we're going to go on and look at the inside of all those flaps and complete the top flap, the middle flap, and the bottom flap. Okay, let's first take a look at the top flap here. And we're going to look at completing the sentences first. It says, a perfect square is any number that shows the area of a square. The square root is another name for the side length. So if you take a look over here below the picture, you have 4 squared equals 16. 16 is the perfect square because that is the area of this figure right here. There are a total of 16 squares. The square root is the side length. That's the 4, because each dimension of this square is a 4 by 4 dimension. So the square root tells us how big is the side of that square. So 16 is the area and 4 is the side length. Now if you look down at the middle flap, there are 3 squares in those pictures. So I want you to look at each of these 3 squares, and I want you to determine what is the area of that square and what is the side length. So in the first picture, we have a square with a side length of 3. The area is 3 squared, or 9. But the square root of 9 tells us what the side length of that square is, and that side length is 3. So even though I have 9 squares in the picture, I have a side length of 3. So the square root of 9, the square root of that area, tells us about the side length. In the second picture, we have a square that is a 2 by 2. So we have a 2 by 2 square, which has an area of 4, but the square root of 4 tells us the side length on that square is equal to 2. And then last but not least, we have a 1 by 1 square. So this one only has a side length of 1, which means the area is 1. And the square root of that area tells us about the side length, which is also 1. Now let's go down and look at the bottom flap. This time we see something called a cube. So we have a perfect cube is any number that shows the volume of a cube. So this time we're not looking at area, it's 3 dimensions, so we're talking about volume. The cube root is also known as the side length again. So here you've got a cube. Notice that this cube is 2 squares wide, 2 squares long, and 2 squares deep. So if you have to count up the number of squares in this figure, you would count that it takes a total of 8 cubes to make this volume. Okay? But the side length on that cube, or the cube root of 8, is still 2. And this time you'll notice that the symbol we use for a cube root is slightly different than a square root in that it's that same kind of check mark shape, but there's a little 3 above it because that's how we designate that it's a cube and not a square. Now let's look at the middle. So in the middle we have 2 more pictures. We have a picture of a that looks kind of like a Rubik's Cube to me. That's how I see that. But the dimensions on this cube are 3 all the way around. You have a length, a width, and a depth, all of 3 units. So to find the volume of this cube, you would do 3 times 3 times 3, which gives you a total of 27 cubes. The cube root of 27, don't forget to put the 3 there to indicate it's a cube root, not a square root, is 3 because that tells us the length of each side. Then we have this one lone little cube over here on the side, and you'll notice that it just has dimensions of 1 by 1 by 1. So the volume of that cube is just 1 cubic unit, and there we go, my pen quit working. The cube root of 1 is still 1, meaning the side length on that cube is still equal to 1. We have a little bit more practice to do with square roots and cube roots, but for now this should get you started with your learning from lessons 2-4 and 2-5. You can go ahead and fold those flaps back down, okay, and then you'll be able to see your table of both square roots and cube roots on your paper.